Good afternoon and welcome back for Chapter 45, Module 3, Sections 13 through 14. In this module, we will be reviewing for Section 13, Home and Community-Based Standards for All Providers, and in Section 14, Background Check Requirements. So our first section is 13, and we're going to cover the Home and Community-Based Services Standards for All Providers. And as you can see on the slide, I'm going to read off the slide, all certified waiver providers that deliver direct care services to participants in a facility they own or control must meet all applicable federal and state, city, county, and tribal health and safety code requirements. A facility does include the provider's home if services are being delivered in that setting. All certified waiver providers shall provide services that are home and community-based in nature, which means the service setting assists the participant to achieve success in the environment and supports full access to the greater community to the same degree as individuals not receiving Medicaid home and community-based services. It is selected by the individual from options including non-disability specific settings. It assists the participant to self-advocate and participate in lifelong learning opportunities. It ensures the individual's rights of privacy, dignity, and respect, and freedom from coercion and restraint. It optimizes independence in making life choices, including daily and recreational activities, physical environment, and with whom to interact. It facilitates individual choice regarding services and supports and who provides those. And it encourages individuals to have visitors of their choosing at any time. Moving on, again, continuing with home and community-based service standards for all providers. A new provider owned or operated residential settings intending to serve 5 or more participants will not be certified. Provider facility inspections. Provider-owned and controlled service locations must have a facility inspection completed by an outside entity at least once every 36 months. The facility inspection must be completed by a fire marshal or designee, a certified or licensed home or building inspector, or appropriate contractor inspecting a part of the facility within the scope of the contractor's license. And the facilities that are found to have deficiencies must correct them within 30 days or have a plan on file regarding how the deficiency will be corrected with follow-up indicated that includes the date it will be completed. Continuing on with home and community-based service standards for all providers, external inspections. Providers who do not deliver services in a location that they own or control must sign a no services in a provider-operated setting form verifying the above. They must also, should a provider choose to deliver services in a location they own or control without an external inspection or the required notification, the division may sanction or decertify that provider. For self-inspections, providers who deliver services in a location they own or lease shall complete an annual self-inspection of the location to verify that the provider is in compliance with all items listed in Chapter 45, Section 13, Part F. The rules have the same basic standards for all providers. A provider that is also nationally accredited must also meet these requirements of an accrediting agency. For example, a provider who is accredited by CARF, they may also be required to conduct 1 internal inspection annually and 1 external inspection every 36 months. However, the division will only review provider documentation for compliance with Chapter 45 rules, which is 1 internal inspection annually and an external inspection every 36 months. Continuing on with home and community-based services standards for all providers, emergency plans and drills. These are essential. Providers shall have written emergency plans and procedures for fires, bomb threats, natural disasters, including but not limited to earthquakes, blizzards, floods, tornadoes, fires. The division interprets this to include wildfires as well. Power failures, medical or behavioral emergencies, missing person, must be able to complete a drill for each category. Safety during violent or other threatening situations, vehicle emergency, and a contingency plan regarding how a provider can care for or provide supervision to the participant and any children under the age of 12 or other individuals requiring support and supervision. They must also have an emergency plan that includes a contingency plan that assures there is a continuation of essential services when an emergency occurs. The above listed categories are all that the division is requiring per the Chapter 45 rules to be completed. When a provider is being recertified, division staff will be looking to ensure that these drills are completed in all categories for all provider locations. Continuing on to home and community-based services, standards for all providers. Drills for providers providing 24-hour services must include the provider documenting the review of all applicable emergency plans at least once a year on each shift, and the documentation that they do have must include the following: written identification of any concerns noted during the review of plans, written documentation of follow-up to noted concerns, and one actual evacuation is required annually for applicable emergency plans, with the remainder being a review of the plan if desired. They must also have drills for providers not providing 24-hour services, and that provider must document the review of all applicable emergency plans during normal working hours at least once a year on each shift. The above requirements for documentation are applicable for this section as well. The division has a drill plan form that is available to providers to use that designates each required category. This is optional, as providers are welcome to develop their own template as well, but we do have that for you in the event that you need it. Drills must be run in all identified categories as described on the slide. All providers, including CARF providers, must run all drills as identified by Chapter 45 rules. Providers who provide non-24-hour services are still required to show evidence of running applicable emergency drills with their participants at least once annually. Continuing on with home and community-based services standards for all providers, the following standards are additions or changes to from the previous rules and can be found in Chapter 45, Section 13, Part G. Residential and day service facilities must ensure that participants have access to food at all times and provide nutritious meals and snack options. They must also have a regimented meal schedule. A regimented meal schedule cannot be required. All chemicals, poisons, or household cleaners must be secured in a manner that prevents the risk of improper use or harm to individuals as outlined in the plan of care. The use of video monitors by providers in participant bedrooms or bathrooms is prohibited. Other forms of remote monitoring or sensors may be used where appropriate. Food restrictions such as locking up food, restricting access cannot occur for a congregate group based on one person's need. Participants should have a choice as to when and where they eat. Chemicals, if a participant is safe to use cleaning chemicals that contain bleach or other caustic agents, this should be outlined in the plan of care. The division will consider the group in the congregate settings, so if one person is not safe to have access to chemicals, that means that they need to be secured in a manner that does not allow for access for that person. So if they are stored in common areas, then they must be secured. Continuing on with home and community-based services standards for all providers, Providers shall ensure that all participants residing in a provider-owned or leased facility have a lease or residency agreement for the location in which they are agreeing to reside, that is signed by the participant and or their legally authorized representative. The lease must allow for the same responsibilities and protections from evictions as all tenants under the landlord-tenant law of the state of Wyoming, county, and city where the facility is located. At no time may a participant be asked to leave their residence on a regular basis to accommodate the provider. The participant must have freedom and support to control their schedules and their activities. They must have freedom to furnish and decorate their sleeping and living unit with the lease or other agreement. They must have a private bedroom with no more than one person to a bedroom, except as stated in Chapter 45, Section 13, Part G, as listed on the slide. And they must have an individual bed unless the participants are legally related or joint sleep accommodations are specifically requested by the participant and specified in the plan of care. So just to rehash that, all participants must have a lease. It is the provider's responsibility to determine what the local regulations are regarding landlord-tenant rules for the area. It is important to note that if a participant lives in the provider's home, such as a residential habilitation or special family habilitation home, the provider cannot ask the participant to leave the residence to give the provider a break. This is not acceptable. The provider can bring another employee to the home, or another provider could come in and care for the participant, but unless it is the participant's choice, they cannot be asked to stay elsewhere for the convenience of the provider. Moving on to home and community-based services, standards for all providers. All participants shall have access to their personal space and belongings. They should have access to the appropriate egress and lockable entrance, which can be unlocked by the participants. No devices may be used that prohibit a participant's entry or exit from the bedroom. They must have a secure place for their personal belongings, which the participant may freely access. And they should have a key or other type of access to a lock for both the housing unit, the participant's bedroom, and any form of locked storage that holds the participant's personal belongings, with only appropriate staff having access to those keys. Except for minors, providers must allow participants to have a locking door, and they must be given a key to their bedroom. So please remember that it is also expected that if a participant only wants certain people to have access to their bedroom, they do have this right. Continuing on with home and community-based services, standards for all providers. Any provider that is transporting a participant shall comply with all applicable federal, state, county, and city laws. This is including but not limited to vehicle and driver licensing and insurance, and shall maintain vehicles in good repair, keep current emergency information on each participant in the vehicle, or demonstrate how emergency information is quickly accessible each time a participant is transported somewhere, and keep and replenish first aid supplies in that vehicle. They must also conduct quarterly self-inspections or have the vehicle inspected by a mechanic to ensure the vehicle is operational, safe, and in good repair. Continuing on with home and community-based services, standards for all providers. Settings that include a modification to a participant's right to food or a non-regimented meal schedule imposed by a provider must be ordered by the participant's attending physician and be present in the plan of care. Also, settings that include any restriction to a participant's right to visitors, communication, privacy, or other standards in this section may only be restricted as documented in an approved plan of care, with the restriction being time limited and following the requirements listed in sections 4 and 18 of this chapter. For more information on how rights can be restricted or how restrictive interventions can be used, please refer to the rights restriction training that is available on the division's website. Moving to section 14, background check requirements. All providers, employees, including self-direction employees, anyone with unsupervised access to participants must complete and pass a background check screening. This includes Department of Family Services Central Registry screening, the Office of Inspector General, or OIG, exclusion database screening, and the state and national fingerprint criminal history check. An individual cannot deliver unsupervised services to a participant 18 years or older until the DFS Central Registry screen and OIG exclusion database screen have been returned with no findings, and the fingerprint criminal history check is in process. Individuals cannot deliver unsupervised services to a participant 17 or younger until the DFS Central Registry screen, OIG exclusion database screen, and the fingerprint criminal history check have been returned with no findings. If a provider is delivering services in their own home, anyone living in the home ages 18 years or older must pass all components of the background screening. If a person is staying in the home longer than 1 month, they must also complete a background screening of the DFS Central Registry screening and the state and national fingerprint criminal history check. This does not include the participant residing in the home. A successful background check screening shall include, as discussed on the slide, the DFS Central Registry screening, a United States Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General's exclusions database search result, which shows that the individual or entity is not currently excluded, and a state and national fingerprint criminal history record check, which shows that the individual has not been convicted, pled guilty, no contest to, or does not have a pending deferred prosecution. Continuing on with Section 14, the background check requirements, as listed on the slide, you can see the categories. An offense against the person includes homicide, kidnapping, sexual assault, robbery and blackmail, and assault and battery. Similar laws of any other state or the United States relating to these crimes as well. An offense against morals, decency, and family include bigamy, incest, abandoning or endangering children, violation of order of protection and endangering children, controlled substances, or similar laws of any other state or the United States relating to these crimes. Continuing on to background check requirements, individuals that do not pass the background check screening may not supervise, provide, or bill for waiver services, nor have unsupervised access to participants. Providers must keep evidence of current background check screenings for all required persons. Screenings must be maintained in the corporate name or organization and any trade name or names used in this state. Individuals that do not pass the screening may be denied certification or terminated. Providers who employ individuals or an individual without the required background check may be subject to sanctions. And volunteers under 18 years of age must be supervised by an adult with a successful background check screening. Finally, last of this section and Module 3, background check requirements, transferring background checks between providers. Individuals must have a successful background check that is no less than 60 months old, which is the equivalent of 5 years. It can be transferred between one provider to another, but there must be a signed and notarized release to the receiving provider entity. The background check must be no more than 60 months or 5 years old, and the individual must have been employed by another DD provider within 30 calendar days. If an individual has not been employed by a DD provider within 30 calendar days, a new background check is required to be completed. Wyoming developmental disability waiver providers, they may transfer these successfully between provider agencies with these conditions. So just make sure that you're following all the conditions that are listed on the slide if you are transferring background checks between providers. If you have questions regarding the new process on background checks, please be sure to email wdhr@wyo.gov, and they should be able to answer your questions. That concludes our training for Chapter 45, Module 3. We will record Module 4 coming up next, and that will cover sections 15 through 19. Thank you for attending, and have a wonderful day.